When we think about inequality, we think about opposites. We think about somebody at the top and somebody at the bottom, and usually we divide these into specific groups, and none is more popular and more well-known than the 99% against the 1%, or the 1% against the rest. Popularized originally by the Occupy Wall Street movement, and to some degree by David Graeber, who coined the slogan, we could say. Now it has become the way of thinking about inequality. It has become a way of studying wealth, about studying inequality in many countries, popularized also by Thomas Piketty's research and his lab's colleagues that always look into what the 1%, so-called 1%, does. But what if this antagonism is wrong, or at least it doesn't lead us to what we would hope for, a more egalitarian and more just society? What if taking away the privileges of the 1% would not automatically leave us with this utopia of a place where we want to live, where people have equal chances and where inequality is not as large? These questions and many others, the Argentinian author, sociologist, Dr. Mariana Heredia, is researching and studying and answering in her new book called The 99% Against the 1%, why the obsession with the rich does not help the fight against inequality. In this episode, I'm talking to Mariana, and we discuss what the alternatives then would be, and why this focus, or what she says, obsession on the wealthy personally, might not be as fruitful in the fight against inequality. Mariana is an expert in social inequality and power relations. She's a professor at the National Council for Research and Technologies in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where she's hosted by the Interdisciplinary School of Higher Social Studies. I'm Alice Krozer. I'm your host for the Inequalities channel, and I'll take you on this ride into a kind of different argument about something that we've all felt familiar and maybe comfortable with, and maybe this comfort is not enough. This screaming about inequality is not enough to deal with the problem of inequality, which is what Mariana argues. We'll have her with us today. We hope you enjoy. Mariana, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Alice.
It's a great pleasure to have you here. It's an honor, and we're very excited to hear from you about your new book. You just published a book that's called The 99% Against the 1%. Why the obsession with the rich does not serve the fight against inequality. Well, this is certainly a provocative title, and it's a little bit against what many people scream out loud in the streets and in the literature and in academic spaces and in public spaces and in political spaces, etc. Right? And you're a researcher of elites and inequality, and you have this, I don't know, counter argument here in the book that you develop. Would you like to talk us a little bit through this argument so we understand where you come from and what you mean by this question of the 99% against the 1%?
Of course. The idea of the book is not that, a contra-argument in the sense of loving riches instead of hating or obsessing with them, but the idea that the treatment of inequality recently has been too much axed in the idea of shouting, pointing out, thinking about the morality of those billionaires or milliardaires, instead of looking at the mechanisms, at the ways in which well-being, power is accumulated and reproduced. It's not a question of personalities, of goodness or evilness, but it's a question of how societies are organized, and they produce in this organization a concentration of advantages in a minority, excluding most of the others of those advantages. And then the idea is, let's try to cool down, to stop shouting and feeling worried about wealth and power, and try to understand what's going on in order to have a better diagnosis. And then we will have better solutions for this concentration that is worrying us. It's the way social sciences can contribute to public discussion, not just to set the fire bigger, or to make people more negative or worried, but to provide new perspectives to understand our world in order to change it.
Sometimes outrage can be very healing and useful and necessary to change things. Why do you think that in this situation, it's a good idea to calm down and to cool down, as you say? And who is this appeal to? I mean, should everybody just keep a cold head and start thinking rationally about this? Or is there maybe a good point for some people to be emotional about this topic still? Or, are we over this emotion? Who are we talking to when we say calm down?
First, the idea is that all inequalities have not only one minority which is taking advantage. The idea of 1%, or the idea of the powerful and rich, is closing the discussion instead of opening it. Because when we talk about machismo, when we talk about patriarchalism, when we talk about, destroying the nature of the environment, when we talk about power and wealth, we treat different kind of elites that must be differentiated in order to use their advantages or to face their power. And the way to reduce and to face these powers more effectively does not need only people in the street shouting with big flags against them, but also policies that can be sustained for a long time in order to reverse or to change or to reduce the advantages or the concentration of these advantages in the minority. The idea that just shouting, that just putting people outside asking for solution will bring solutions immediately, I think is part of the problem, not a part of the solution. There was a time several decades ago that mobilizing, people worries in the street was accompanied by a diagnosis and a clear policy that could reduce inequalities. I feel that now we are growing this feeling of exclusion, of frustration, without giving a clear solution. And I think that is the worst case scenario. We need less worries, more projects, and the sustain of groups that can take and endure these projects over the time.
Would you be worried that if people stop shouting, that there would be an attention diverted away from looking at the power structures behind? Or, could they at least call attention to this problem when there is a lot of screaming? Or is there a chance that this screaming kind of is a cheap way of getting rid of the anger, and then we don't have to talk about what is behind the real power structures, so to speak?
Yes, at the same time, the question is whom are we shouting at? For example, the 1% against the 99% in Wall Street can make people think that there are only a few milliardaires behind this 1% of financial capitals, while financial markets work in a much more complex way. Many investments that are done all around the world are not only the resources of a few number of milliardaires, are also the pensions of several middle and lower classes, Europeans and Latin Americans. Then, yes, financial markets must be changed. The power of finance is part of the social inequality problem today, but it's not a 1% of rich that is behind that. It's all a structure composed by a lot of milliardaires that can place their money and obtain revenues without working. But it's also a lot of money that comes from other sources, in some cases that must be protected, as the pensions. Shouting at them is not enough.
People are easily persuaded by these kind of caricature images, right, of the wealthy as some cabal that is conspiring against all the others, like, as you say, the 3 millionaires that control the world. And or on the other hand, scientists have pointed this out before, people idealize the rich in terms of being something very special and thus worthwhile the attention and worthwhile the money they have, etc. Right? So there's these two counter pictures, one very, very negative and one very, very positive, but that takes away, as you also argue, some of the attention of them being just human beings and that have a lot of money and that need to be put maybe into certain policy restraints, but not necessarily, as you say, on the personal level attacked. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, because much more of the discussion is concentrated on the personality of these big men, which are celebrated and blamed almost in the same proportion. And the question is getting out of this idea of great men. Great men are part of their time. They can achieve or lose money because of certain structures that go far beyond them, and they are not alone. I mean, I think that the 1% idea is a huge coartada. I don't know how to say it in English. You know, it's a great excuse for all those 2%ers, 3%ers, 4%ers that participate on this happy world of the 1%ers, helping them, for example, to place their money abroad, or to avoid taxes, or to protect and prevent any appearance disgraceful accident in their lives, and are there keeping the gates closed for those that are not welcomed. Then, I mean, on the one hand, there are not only a few personalities dealing markets today, there's also a machine composed by lots of people, and the reproduction and the growth of their fortune is not only the merit, I mean, the result of those people attributes are also the result of, lots of people helping them. Talking about the 1%, leave all those that are around them, helping them a lot, including countries and governments, and prevent us from a real discussion about what to do with wealth and power, especially because, as you say, there are lots of hypocrisy talking about the powerful and the rich, because they are blamed and at the same time they are imitated. Because, I mean, that is one of the ideas of the book. A book about the elites is a book about the ambition, about the way we conduct and recompense and reward ambition in our world. And unfortunately, ambition is being rewarded when it does not consider the wealth or the well-being of masses. I mean, unfortunately, the way capitalism, democracy are organized today, tend to reward those that pay less attention to the integration and the progress of their societies.
Before we get into these more structural reasons and also in what we should then do about it, what you're saying now is that there is a certain cultural component attached to this, right? Cultural, maybe not in terms of individual culture or national culture, but more maybe a culture of our time. Is this book specifically relevant now? Is this a book of our time? Would it be different if you had written it, I don't know, 50 years ago, 200 years ago?
I would like to, because one of the starting points of the book was that, I mean, it seems that the workers change over the time, but capital remains untouchable. I mean, reproduce itself with no change over time, and that we needed to historize, to update our way of looking to elites, economic and social elites, in a world of globalization, of financial markets, of new geopolitical challenges. And in that way, yes, the book tries to mix up, to compose with elements coming from different disciplines, a new portrait of the rich and the powerful today.
You say at some point in the book that it might not be enough to just take away the privileges of these very wealthy or the 1% in order to live in this utopian, happy, egalitarian society. I'm exaggerating a bit, but can you explain a little bit why that would probably not be the case?
Taxes are important, and of course it's important to redistribute in a more egalitarian way capital and income. The question is that it is not enough, because even if we can, as we are doing in certain countries in Latin America today, transfer some incomes to poorer households, they will remain always poorer than the richer. And the question there is not just redistributing economic resources, but also preventing these economic resources from having such an importance in people's condition and opportunities of life. I mean, if we keep having elite schools, which are only accessible for those that save and keep lots of money. I mean, gated communities for those that can pay and live separated from the rest, and judicial system that is not strong enough to be just with poorer and richer citizens, then the distribution of money will not be enough. We have to create also something that has been very difficult in America, not only in Latin America, but also in Northern America, strong public institutions. I mean, that is something that was achieved in Europe. And I think that's something to recover in the discussion of social inequalities, is the sense of welfare states, which is not a sense of bigger or smaller state apparatus, but the way of living together under certain rules in similar institutions. I mean, sometimes when we listen to rap singers today, to popular singers today, they do not want to be as certain milliardaires that are famous. They just want to have a lot of money. And they do not only want to have a lot of money to buy big cars and have beautiful girls around them, which is really the cliche of those images of rich men. No, it's very machist as image, but because it is very machist, power and wealth today, even today. But they also want to achieve all their spoiling desires. They just want to do whatever they want, not to subordinate others. And that is something astonishing, is the idea that money can buy anything today. That shows not only economic inequality, but also the weakness of our public institutions. And the way that the only possibility of being respected is to have money. That is something that has to be questioned.
In some ways, it might even be understandable, right? And we were talking about aspiration a moment ago. For people to, is it legitimate to have this aspiration when society is so unequal that once you get to money, you can do whatever you want, right? But as long as you don't have it, you basically cannot do anything you want. So there's this very big difference in opportunities or in capacities to live a fulfilled life, which whatever that is for you individually. Does a situation like that maybe legitimize or legitimate, or at least for on the individual level, this aspiration towards money and towards wealth? And related to that, what is the ideal? What society are we pursuing?
Yes, I think that the question is, we don't human beings don't necessarily pursue money. They pursue recognition and protection. The question is that today, recognition and protection seems to be only attached to money. It was not the case before. There were many ways, of being recognized, not only being millionaire, also having, a scientific achievement, or being a huge political leader that could, construct a better world, or a professional with a certain integrity. All
when you
those
say before, how long away are we talking?
I think that in the post-war period, as society was more stabilized, as as there were certain roles that were recognized as important, as the state created and nourished these professional corps that were important, that had a certain authority. I mean, these types of recognition existed. Now it seems that to be a great artist, you must sell a lot of, of your work, while most artists have been recognized after their death. And because they create a revolutionary way of seeing the world or representing the world. And the same with protection. I mean, many rights, many possibilities that were before in the clearly 50 years ago. I mean, achievements of middle classes, having its own house, having a stable occupation, being able to send their children to good schools where they will be able to develop their talents, were something that was offered to most of the society, or at least to middle classes. Now we have to understand that in many Western countries, which is not the case of the Asian countries that had another evolution, but in many Western countries, that is no longer the case. And that what we are living with, this rise of new right ideas, has a lot to do with this worry, with this fear of instability, of this protection.
And this dissatisfaction with the status quo, right? So
dissatisfaction, exactly. That the only way of solving this is just to save yourself alone. That you only can trust in yourself, on your very close family and relatives. I mean, also that shows the erosion of the public spirit. The idea that each of us can be saved alone.
So would you say that your book is an appeal to return to a community or a society?
I would say that my book stressed the importance of putting into the discussion of social inequalities public goods, not only economic redistribution, not only social conflict. Social conflict can be very important if you can bring this dissatisfaction into a certain orientation which can achieve the progress of majorities. But if it's just a conflict that reproduces itself from time to time with no answer, it can erode democracies, as it's doing now.
Well, certainly, there are answers attached to it, right? They're just not answers that are very community oriented or very open-minded, xenophobic, and movements like that, right? I mean, they are also answers. They're just probably not the answers we want for the future.
Yes, and a retreat in these close communities that share almost every idea that are, I mean, that feel that are aggressed, but any difference, this idea of living with different people, but in a space of peace and common integration. I mean, even for upper middle classes, the possibility of crossing with someone from a modest empire extraction from I mean, poorer than them has become rarer. I mean, we don't have many opportunities of mixing up and seeing. I mean, interactionist said, closeness brings affection, affection brings closeness. Once you see that someone of color can be nice, can help you, you stop having fear. you stop rejecting them. You stop thinking that they are just bear by the state support, and realize that they are working very hard, that they face very difficult lives, and they do their best. And those kind of things are lost in part also because the media, and especially social networks, are closing people into fragmented groups, and are making more difficult to find each other in a common space. I do feel that it's not enough to redistribute wealth, even if I think it's very important, but not just to redistribute, also to use that money to reinforce these dispositives of integration, of law, of common law.
We need spaces to encounter the other, right? In order to create empathy, we need to see others that are different from ourselves and not remain in our bubbles. And one of the ways that traditionally this has been successful, or in other places it is successful, is through public policies that are universal and for everybody to meet each other, right? Like public schools, also public healthcare, etc. Are we going back to some socio-democratic ideal of the 60s, 70s, or what is the ambition that we have now for the future?
I don't know, societies will say, but I mean, I think that is the responsibility of social scientists, not just to believe that conflict is enough. Conflict needs a direction. Conflict needs a horizon, no? A better horizon. I do not feel that today there is a lack of activism. I don't feel that people are passive in their houses, just suffering alone. I think that there are many that are going the street, showing their dissatisfaction. The problem is that they do not know what to do with this dissatisfaction. And that governors, I would say presidents, have less tools to provide answers, because they do not have as much economic resources as before, because they lack of authority to show that they are not just a group of powerful men using a machine in their benefit, but that they are dealing with that concerns everyone, that they are protecting the law. I mean, the common law, the possibility of living together in peace and progress, of course. I mean, it's amazing that so many dystopias are being, produced. I mean, it's so difficult to imagine a better future today. I do not feel that just distributing wealth will enable us to achieve a better future. I think that must be accompanied by empathy and a renovation of the way of living together in respecting differences.
So if the ideal is a more inclusive society with, let's say, public goods for everybody of a certain quality, so that these inequalities of opportunities do not arise in the first place, so we don't get to this inequality of outcomes that we are currently seeing, which produces this anger. If this is the ideal, how do we get there?
Yes, I think that constructing other ways of recognition and protection, that would be for me something important. I mean, obviously disciplining financial markets and constructing once again long-term perspectives. We are just all living in the present, which also makes more difficult to see the future and to construct a better future. I mean, just to slow down certain processes related to technology, related to finances that are going too fast and without any control. Then I would say reinforcing authority, reinforcing democratic authority against other powers, showing that governments can make riches pay, can make riches respect the law, and if not, they are sanctioned, showing that the law, is useful also to prevent those powerful and rich people to make whatever they want. And then constructing other ways of recognition and protection. Most of those that tend to support right ideas are those that work 12 hours a day. We have to redistribute also work, because you have today in the same society, living one next to the other, people that cannot find a job to work 3 hours a week, and the other one that next to him that is working 14 hours a day. Responsibilities and right must be redistributed in a more equal way. I think that would enable probably to abandon certain freedoms that we have conquered. Spoiling this consumer that can choose whatever. Maybe we should consume less, but better. By less things, but things that are more useful and important in our lives. this kind of changes, but which need a cultural and political authority that can face these trends that seems to be running without any control.
Are you hopeful we'll get to this future, or what makes you hopeful that we would get to that future?
No, I am not at all optimistic.
Okay.
Especially because I mean, and that is something that concerns social scientists, I would say, because social scientists have chosen in certain ways, encouraged by this proliferation of advocacy, then we have chosen our cause. Either we are with those that are sensitive to the environment, either to feminists, either to LGTB movements, either to, I mean, as if we could split the state in, I mean, demands and solutions for each of these minorities, losing completely the idea of a common space of law and empathy. I think that, I mean, our role as social scientists is also to stress that egalitarianism in the past was related to the fight of workers, no doubt about it, was related to the fight of social movements, yes, but it was also related to the construction of strong public institutions. And that is something that is more transversal. It's not related to one minority or the other.
It would enable us to not have one minority goal cancel out the other, right? Or to put them up against each other. What you're saying is that we want an integral solution where all of these are considered.
Yes, or permitting itself the same abuses that they have blamed before to others. Because you are a woman, you can be authoritarian. No, authoritarianism is wrong, whomever exerts it. I was very touched by the findings of social sciences that demonstrate that I mean, it's very difficult to eradicate power and wealth, and it's probably not positive to eradicate it completely. And I feel that frequently criticism in the public sphere is just an excuse of replacement. I mean, those that are in the establishment, I criticize for those that will replace them, and so on. Then let's recognize that people fight for power and wealth. And let's see how we organize the distribution of power and wealth and this fight in order to link it better with public interest. There will always be ambitious people. And it's not wrong necessarily, because there were ambitious people. We arrived to the moon, we created vaccines. I mean, we I don't know, we achieved certain human progresses. At the same time, we created the atomic bomb. We went to wars, to unjust wars, and we subordinate others until denigration. And then the question is not power, yes or not, wealth, yes or not. It's how we organize the distribution and the exercise of power and wealth.
What was the response to your book when it came out?
Argentina is living, I imagine that as the United States today, or the Brazilian society, with these polarized elections that have been so tough. The split of the disappearance of the public space, even for discussion, not only the disappearance of public schools or the reduction of public school to poor schools, or and this lack of opportunities for exchange, even the discussion, even the possibility of publishing an article that will be read for those that are in different positions has become very rare. And one of the positive, and I would say the thing that made me a little bit more optimistic, is that I've been called by radios of the two opposing sides, and I could talk to them, and they could listen and ask for questions, and we finished talking about, new strategies of healing this dissatisfaction that was for me very encouraging, because this splitting apart, this polarization serves people to stop thinking, to stop arguing, to stop discussing in the sense of exchanging ideas with others. Then when you try to restore this idea of a conversation with certain objectives that can be shared, and this happens, it's magic.
So maybe there is some hope. Maybe you're the hope. You're the hope there.
Oh, not me, but I mean, I think that we, journalists, artists, writers, I mean, culture people, those that are trying to understand the world and enabling sympathy, empathy. That is what I think is part of our job, not to nourish opposition and violence, to try to find solutions in peace.
Mariana, before we come to a close, what made you interested in studying these things in the first place? Why do you think they're worthwhile?
I think that knowledge is a collective enterprise. We all give, a small contribution to something that is produced by a generation of intellectuals, of scientists. And looking what was produced at the beginning of my career, I realized that in general, we accuse or we pointed out elites as the explanation of many processes, but we did not study them in depth. And that is what I could contribute, just to look at them closely and understand how they were organized, how they have accumulated their advantages, wealth, power, and that knowing is a way of power. And I mean, that's why making this knowledge public could help societies to understand and deal with elites in a more efficient and positive way. I mean, I just an anecdote, in 2002 and 3, Argentina was in a huge political crisis. I mean, the piqueteros, which are social movements that were asking for cash transfers, for state protections, were in the street. I mean, the border really of a social revolution. And I was interviewing entrepreneurs and high economic officials. And I went to the office of one of them, and he had a book on his table, which was about piqueteros. And I said, wow, the book has just been published by 2 authors that were friends of mine. And I said, wow, you're reading a book about, social movements. That's so astonishing. And he said, of course, they are, they are challenging governability. They are putting the order in question. They can they can go against my interest. I must know them in detail. That's why I try to study elites, because if we want to change the way they concentrate advantages, we have to know them in detail, or at least in the more accurate way that social sciences can provide. If not, we are fighting against a puppet, or something that is dead. A straw man. Yes.
Thank you so much, Mariana. We hope you're not totally tired and annoyed with the topic yet, and you want to research more and enlighten us more about elite structures and all these interesting things you find in your research, which is, of course, very helpful. It's a kind of know your enemy strategy, but it's also a know your way towards a better future one. I think you might prefer that second interpretation.
Yes, and we are at the same time allies and enemies inside us. Society can stress one thing or the other. Also, the idea of individual is against social sciences. Social sciences teach us that we are many things at the same time, and we activate certain emotions, certain strategies, certain orientation in functions of what we find. Well, then, it's a public concern how we will deal with the recognition, with the protection with the construction of a better world is not just the question of the 1%, it's also the responsibility of the 5th, the 10% in which we are part.
Mariana, thank you so much for this conversation. Very interesting about the book, your new book, the 99% against the 1%. Whether this is really the fight or the focus we should have in the fight against inequality and for a more just and more equal society. For everybody out there, get the book and read it, now in Spanish and hopefully soon in English as well. And we hope that you'll continue researching, as I said, these topics so we learn more about them. And we hope that you consider the findings in there and maybe also consider your aspiration and your ambition towards what is important in life, right? Maybe it's not only money. Maybe it's also important, but maybe not only important. Thank you so much for being with us today, Mariana.
So much, Ali. It's a pleasure talking to you.
And thank you all for watching another episode of Future Frame TV. I'm Elise Krozer, your host for the Inequalities channel. And if you like these topics or if you want to learn more about inequality, please join us again in our next episode when we'll talk inequalities again with our invited experts. Also, consider subscribing to the channel, liking, sharing, commenting on the episodes we have, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a very good afternoon. Bye-bye.